Okay, let's talk about the junk drawer wide receivers from the 2023 draft class. I mean, the sleepers that everyone should know about and no one talks about enough, and only we know because we're really smart, that are going to be drafted in the third round of rookie drafts. Anyway, the first wide receiver I want to talk about is Jaden Reed. He starts off in the MAC conference, which isn't that impressive, but he was running like a 2.37 yards per route run with those numbers, so relative to the routes he was getting, he was actually getting pretty effective production on it. He was running 25 routes a game and 2 receiving yards per team pass attempts, which tells you even with 797 yards, Western Michigan was such a small offense, even in the MAC conference. One of the things I love about Jaden Reed's profile is that he is an elevator. He's a Kenny Golladay, but he actually elevated earlier in his college career and actually played more, which was a Big Ten, playing for Michigan State. Well, they get 147 receptions, I think, for 2,060 or so receiving yards throughout his entire time in Western Michigan. He played for full 3 years, played for over 20 routes a game for each of those years, and over 8 games. And we see him not only elevate, but elevate relatively well. But in his second year, he actually saw a drastic role change in that they actually moved him much more outside the numbers. He only gets a 15% slot rate, whereas in his first year at Michigan State, he's running a 75% slot rate, which is in no way a bad thing, but it does create a different level of expectation of what these numbers should be. So there are some struggles when he elevates, but it's pretty clear it becomes immediately a significant part of the offense, which is overall impressive. So the next player I want to talk to you about as a deeper wide receiver from this class that you should really at least know the name of and maybe go run your own processes over, is called Nathaniel Dell. He's also referred to as Tank Dell. 2 tanks in this draft. He played in the American Conference, which is a very low drafted conference, and played for Houston. What I will say is Nathaniel Dell was better in a relatively similar role on this team than all of those players, and we have seen the NFL take a few 6th, 7th round shots on players from this team who are relatively good, so let's start there. Again, the most recent player drafted into the NFL at all was 6th round Marcus Stevenson, who has not been a bad NFL player, but is entirely unfantasy relevant. But he was running like an 80 and 90% slot rate with a 9 and a 12 ADOT through both of the years that he was wide receiver 1 of Houston in the American Conference in 2018 and 2019. Nathaniel Dell has got 3 years on that team several years later, from 2020 to 2022, running at a lower slot rate and a slightly higher ADOT. He ran a 6.5 slot rate in his first year and a 13.2 ADOT. I'm probably just going to put the stats on the screen, so I don't know why I'm just reading them to you, because reading numbers is boring. I think Nathaniel Dell might be the best producer to go into the NFL, potentially from this team. Now, he is running that 50-60% slot rate and an 11 ADOT, which puts him in the higher categories, but the interesting thing for NFL draft capital is that's where the NFL spends most of its draft capital. And the disappointment there is Nathaniel Dell is the tiny guy this year. He weighed in at the combine at 165 pounds, 67 inches tall, and ran a 4.5, which gives him a weight-adjusted speed score of not good. And anyone who pays attention to size or thinks that players are going to break because they're not built like DK Metcalf, not going to really be interested in Tank Dell. Now, if size and speed are more your thing, especially when looking at an undervalued or potentially lower drafted wide receiver going into the NFL, then A.T. Perry's probably got your back much better. He is slightly slim, but he is 6'3.5" inches tall according to his combine profile, and 198 pounds. And a 4.47 at the NFL combine, so the fastest of the guys we've talked about so far. A.T. Perry played for 4 years at Wake Forest between 2019 and 2022, racking up 171 yards, 2,662 receiving yards through that time proper. And those final 2 years really popped off with a 1,200 yard season and a 1,000 yard season, playing 14 and 13 games respectively at the ACC. Now, if Wake Forest sounds familiar, it's because we have seen a lot of somewhat promising Greg Dortch a few years ago, who I actually did like pre-draft. In 2019, Greg Dortch was running a 2 receiving yards per team pass attempt average and a 3.1 yards per route run. And we liked him, and this year we actually finally saw and got some NFL run, but it's worth noting that's 2019, 20, 21, 22. That took 4 years. Lower drafted players often take a while to find any type of opportunity to volume. Again, just establishing expectations. But Greg Dortch was a tiny dude, to be fair. 173 pounds, 67 inches tall. A.T. Perry, on the other hand, is running a 2.4 average receiving yards per team pass attempt and a 2.6 yards per route run average. His best season was 2.5 2.5 receiving yards per team pass attempt and 2.7 yards per route run, both equally impressive. But he was also running, like I said, much more often outside the numbers at a 9.2 slot rate. In this class, if you're looking for a taller guy, and we're looking at a smaller slot oriented class, A.T. Perry was running almost the exact opposite role. He's got lower draft expectation, but was performing relatively well on high volume in the ACC, even if it was for Wake Forest. So all three of these guys tended to have an outside the number role. Nathaniel Dell is the one who ran in the slot the most, but both Jaden Reed and A.T. Perry had slot rates 20% or below, whereas Nathaniel Dell at least had 2 years where he was running a 50 and 60% slot rate with a higher elevated ADOT, which is interesting when you're comparing all three. But in terms of size, both Jaden Reed and Nathaniel Dell are under 200 pounds and don't exactly fit that alpha role that the NFL likes to look at for lower drafted players, with A.T. Perry is at least over 6'3" and around that 200 pound barrier. So you might, if you like that kind of thing, he might be more your jam in terms of a late round wide receiver, because he can have more expectation of running that type of role in the NFL. Having said that, it's Nathaniel Dell. It's the other tank in this class I end up really liking. There are some other names from this class, and I don't think I'd be doing my job very well if I didn't mention them. Xavier Hutchinson was a really interesting prospect. Rashee Rice is someone that Zach Reed from the Dynasty Dummies continued to point out to me early in the pre-draft process. I looked at both. Both looked pretty impressive, but I ended up liking the three that I've mentioned more for various different reasons. I don't want to lay it out, but they're definitely names you should know about, and you should go look at them more in depth. I ended up liking Ronnie Bell. I don't think I've heard anyone else mention him at all, but I would go dig into him. I'm not putting him on this list. I don't think, and again, I don't think I would be doing whatever job this is very well if I didn't mention Jonathan Mingo. It's Jonathan Mingo's season on my Twitter timeline right now. I think he tested very well. Again, if you like those combine type metrics, he's over 200 pounds, over 220 pounds? Yeah, 220 pound wide receiver, 74 inches tall, so he's well over 6'1", and ran a 4.5 40, a weighted adjusted speed score of 111. He definitely looks like a dynamic all-weapon type receiver who actually has higher production stats than you would expect that don't test well when you've got them on a list comparing them to players that have full roles at higher conferences when it's adjusted by draft round and stuff like that. But he ran a 1.6 receiving yards per team pass attempt, which is relatively okay, and a 1.3 yards per route run average, which is terrible, but yards per route run is more contextual, and he was playing at Ole Miss. I'm mainly mentioning him not because his stats jumped off. I went and looked at his stats because Jake Anderson, my former co-host from the Dynasty Crossroads, and is now just a golfer apparently, but he still likes to do some rookie evaluation. He's got a good eye on tape, and I used to trust it a lot, and he really likes some of the traits that Jonathan Mingo is putting up. So check Jonathan Mingo out as well. He's not someone that's showing up for me, but Jake's got pretty good eyes, and I've heard some other people mention his name as well. And thanks for checking out the video. If you want to see any of their stats, it's available pinned to my Twitter timeline, pinned to my Patreon timeline for free. It links you to a Google Doc, and yeah, all the stats are there. You can download it, look at it any way you want, and I won't even know you're doing it. So don't worry about it.